Howdy! Welcome to Aspire Mountain Academy. I'm Professor Curtis, your instructor for this course in Introductory Statistics. In less than 10 minutes, this video explores the 3 ways to design an observational study. Let's get started. In the previous mini lectures, we've been discussing sampling methods because they strongly influence the quality of our data set. But that's not the only influence on data quality. How we design our statistical study also has an influence. How we use and analyze the data matters because that can affect the results we get from our study. In that light, we need to look at different ways to organize our analysis. There are 3 main ways to organize an observational study: cross-sectional studies, retrospective studies, and perspective studies. There are also 3 ways to organize an experiment: through randomization, replication, and blinding. In this mini lecture, we'll discuss the 3 ways to organize an observational study. The 3 ways to organize an experiment we'll explore in a future mini lecture. Okay, first at bat we have cross-sectional studies. Now, in a cross-sectional study, you're basically looking at 2 or more different groups and collecting data on those groups for one specific point in time. Usually, but not always, the present. An example would be, say, a survey of risk factors between smokers and non-smokers during a given year. Another example would be taking a group of 6th graders and comparing their reading abilities based on what economic background they came from. Poor, middle class, or wealthy. I actually believe that middle class is just a different type of poor, but that's a discussion we can have another time. The examples here on the screen are cross-sectional studies because each of them, we're just looking at one point in time. Okay, another way to look at an observational study is to go back in time and look at a range of time in the past. Using a range of time in the past would produce a retrospective study. Here we collect the data by going back into usually some old records somewhere, although you can also collect data through interviews. Do you remember such and such from such and such time? And then these are what we call retrospective studies. Now, you've probably heard them referred to by their more popular name, case studies, which is a shortened form of case control studies. An example would be investigating whether the chemicals used in tire manufacturing increase the risk of death. Given the nature of tire manufacturing, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, yeah, they probably do. I would expect my study to confirm that, but hey, I'm going to keep an open mind. Maybe it's totally healthy to be around chemicals used in tire manufacturing. I don't know. I'll let the math tell me what it tells me. Now, in order to conduct this type of study, you'd first want to evaluate employee records for the tire manufacturing plant to see who had what exposure. Who were the workers? What chemicals were they exposed to? How long was the exposure? When were they exposed? Okay. Then you'd want to pair that up with an examination of public death records at the county courthouse to determine which employees died and when. Well, there's your 2 subsets. You've got the group that died and the group that didn't die. You can then perform a statistical analysis to see if there is a statistically significant difference between them. Oh, and you do remember what a statistically significant difference means, right? Okay, finally, we could flip our study around and look into the future. If you're looking into the future instead of the past, then what you have is a prospective study. Now, pure statisticians like to call the groups that share common factors in prospective studies cohorts. And that's why prospective studies are sometimes called cohort studies. They're also known as longitudinal studies because you're usually looking at a long length of time into the future. An example would be investigating if there's any relationship between obesity and heart attack in women. But you decide to collect data over the next 10 years. Okay? It's a prospective study because You're looking into the future. Now, to conduct the study, you need to enroll your participants and then collect their weight to establish a baseline for comparison. Then you follow up at set intervals, say every month, 6 months, year, whatever, and collect the same data at those times. This continues over the next 10 years, and then you analyze your data. That's a prospective study. Okay, to help us remember what we've learned, we're going to play a short game in which I give you an observational study, and then you tell me what type it is. You ready? Here's the first example. The Nurses' Health Study began in 1976 with 121,700 female registered nurses between 30 and 55 years old. Subjects were surveyed in 1976 and every 2 years thereafter. It continues today. What type of observational study do we have here? Well, this is a prospective study. The study collects data on into the future, and that's the key characteristic of prospective studies. Okay, here's the next one. Researchers investigating drinking and driving obtain records of past car crashes and partition subjects into groups based on evidence of alcohol consumption. What do we have here? Well, I hope you said retrospective study. Here you're looking into the past, and yes, that's a key characteristic of retrospective studies. What about researchers from the National Institutes of Health surveying 500 adults of each gender to determine the current rates of smoking among adult males and females? I'll give you a moment to respond. Well, this is a cross-sectional study. And data are collected from the present, not the past, and not into the future. This means you have a cross-sectional study. Okay, here's the last one. The Framingham Heart Study was started in 1948 and is ongoing. Its focus is on heart disease. What do we have here? Well, I hope you weren't fooled and that you said prospective study. Here we do have data in the past, so you might have been tempted to call this a retrospective study, but the data collection goes on into the future. It's that characteristic that makes this a prospective study. That brings us to the end of this mini lecture. I do hope you found it helpful. You can find more mini lectures for this and other courses at AspireMountainAcademy.com. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.